All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Please give us just a few seconds. It takes just a bit for Zoom to let everybody through the virtual doors. So we'll get started here in just about 20 seconds once I see the folks coming in starting to slow down. Good afternoon, everybody. Give us just a few seconds. All right, we're still having people come in, so that's a good sign, right? Glad you guys could join us this afternoon. And it looks like we're slowing down in terms of people coming through the virtual door. So let's go ahead and get started. Don't want to waste anybody's time, but good afternoon. My name is Michelle Bird. I'm the Public Affairs Director here at Larimer County. My role this afternoon in our Zoom webinar panel meeting is to basically be your Zoom host. So that makes me part IT, part facilitator. I'll walk you guys through how you can participate in the meeting today after we do introductions with the other folks that are joining us. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric and Mark, and why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Eric Freed, I'm the Chief Building Official for Larimer County. Thanks everyone for your interest in building codes and the building code changes today.
Good afternoon, my name is Mark Tousley. I'm the Lead Building Inspector, and again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, gentlemen. Really quick, what we're going to do today, I'm going to walk you through how to function in this Zoom platform. Our friends from the building department, they're going to give a presentation about what the code changes look like, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A for you guys. Obviously, since we're in a virtual platform, that looks different than it would be in a regular meeting. So you'll notice this platform is maybe a little bit different if you've never done a Zoom webinar before, that the chat function you're used to doesn't necessarily work. We can chat you guys, but you guys can't chat us. That's really for protection. When we have a public meeting like this that we advertise, literally anyone from anywhere in the world can join, and it presents a risk if we open up the chat that folks can send links that'll put ransomware bugs on your computer, maybe take you to a site you do not want to be at. And so that's why we don't use the chat box, and that's why we also don't allow attendees to use their video. Again, we don't know who is joining us, and it could be anyone from anywhere, and we don't kind of want to take that risk with what people would put on their screens. Instead, we have a Q&A box at the bottom. So I invite you guys at any point during the presentation, if you have questions that come up, start putting them in the Q&A box. They're going to go through their full presentation first, and then we'll go back to Q&A just to make sure we get through everything. And so once they're done with their presentation, I'll start with the Q&A box. That truly is the fastest way to get us answers. But if you want to chat with us, we also have that ability. You'll notice there's a raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, or if you are on the Zoom app on your phone, you can hit that raise hand feature, and that lets us know you want to say something, and we'll take questions during Q&A. If you are on, if you called in instead of using the Zoom app on your computer or your phone, what you do to raise your hand is hit *9. That lets us know that you would like to say something, and I'll walk you through that again after the presentation is over, so you don't have to remember it right now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the guys to give their presentation, and I'm going to turn my video off, and I'll see you guys in a little bit.
So I don't know if you wanted to say anything about translation. Obviously, this presentation is in English, but people prefer in Spanish. I think we can translate it later. This will be recorded, so it'll be available on the website.
Correct. Yes, we are going to, we are recording right now. You guys should have had a notice when you came in. And we will have it translated after the fact. We don't have a translator on today because we did not have anyone indicate that they needed a live translation. So we don't necessarily have a translator on today. But we will translate the video after the fact, and it will be on YouTube alongside the normal recording. So thanks, Eric, for that reminder. I appreciate it. And go ahead, guys.
So, can everybody see, I guess you can't answer this, but this is a seminar on significant I code changes for the 2021 code. Now I got to go into.
See it, Eric. We're good to go.
Okay. But I have to get into the PowerPoint. 1 second. Disable.
Always a technical difficulty, right?
Yeah, this worked fine yesterday.
We can sit on your screen just fine.
Share screen, PowerPoint.
See if you can change the slide.
Okay,
yep, here you go.
Oh, good. So just real quickly, the way this works, in case people aren't aware, every 3 years, the International Code Council publishes a new set of model codes. They become law when a city or county adopts them. Larimer County tries to adopt this every 3 years to keep up with the most recent code adoptions. Board of Commissioners approved the codes after an extensive period of public input, meeting with Fort Collins, kind of doing this jointly, working with home builders, architects, engineers, fire departments, went to the Board of Appeals, went to the Planning Commission. Board of Commissioners approved this in January, and the new codes will take effect with the local amendments on March 1st. And mostly what we're going to focus on today is what the local amendments are more than the code changes. We will talk about some of the code changes as well. So the codes that were adopted, you can see the acronyms, but they're the residential code. And that applies to most buildings, which are just say single family homes, duplexes, and their accessory buildings, as well as townhouses. And then for everything else, there's a set of codes that deals with specific issues. So there's the building code, the energy conservation code, existing building code, fuel gas code, mechanical code, plumbing code, property maintenance code. Also, for the first time this year, we're adopting the swimming pool and spa code. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And the 2020 National Electric Code is already in force in Larimer County as of July 1st, 2020, when we first went to that. But we did adopt some administrative amendments, which we won't talk about because they're really boring, just to make it easier to administer that code. So here's kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about today. The administrative rules, permits, and exceptions, dry but important. The swimming pool and spa code, vacation homes and short-term rentals, which are essentially the same thing, as well as related occupancies, wildfire hazard mitigation, residential fire sprinklers, smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, electric vehicle ready and renewable energy ready homes, radon mitigation, roof coverings, energy code updates, which is probably the biggest change, appliance venting and accessibility. These are what we thought were the most important code changes. There may be others you think are important. We'll try to leave time at the end for questions, and the last slide will be our contact information. If we run out of time, you can always contact us with your questions. So in terms of the administrative rules, each code had a slightly different set of administrative rules in the first chapter. We thought it would be easier to make one set of rules, and all the codes refer back to that set of rules, except for the residential code, which is a little bit different in terms of how long permits are good for and when they expire. So the residential code has one set, and then there's one set for commercial. In terms of permit requirements, we've taken out the local amendments we had, which changed the code. So by going back to the base code, it's a little bit more loose. So now if you build a residential shed up to 200 square feet, as long as it doesn't have utilities and it's not used for any habitable space, which is to say writer's studio, yoga studio, accessory living area. As long as you're just using it basically for storage or playhouse, you do not need a building permit up to 200 square feet. Commercial is still 120 square feet. The code itself also says you don't need a permit for fences up to 7 feet, and now we're just going with what the code says. You still have to follow all land use code rules, including setbacks, floodplains, lot coverage, but you won't need a building permit. So that'll make things a little easier.
And starting this year, we implemented the pool and spa code, regulations for pools with circulation systems. Also on residential pools that exceed 24 inches in depth, 48-inch guards, barriers, 4-inch spacings still apply. Automatic covers, alarms on windows and doors, suction entrapment avoidance devices, and also includes spas. So lockable covers on spas that are greater than 24 inches in depth.
And the barrier requirements didn't change. We had those in effect, but now we have a complete set for commercial pools that might go in a hotel, motel, the ranch, something like that. And just real quick, this gives you a sense of what's in the swimming pool and spa code. Those are the chapters in the code. So it depends on what kind of pool is being built. For most people with residential pools, it's just the barrier requirements.
So premises identification is now in the code. We've always required it. This more specifically states what we're looking for. So we need a sign posted at the public way. So a lot of houses are right off of a street. That's fine to have it at the street. If you have a long 100, 200 foot driveway, that needs to be down at the street so we know where the access is. Then if that's divided and going to separate areas, separate parcels, then, you know, just a right or left sign or which direction to go at that point. Should be readily visible. Don't put like orange spray paint on OSB. It tends to bleach out really fast and we can't read it. So we want a high contrast identification so the markings stand out. Include the address, the permit number, and the location of the permit if it's not directly at the site. On a lot of sites, you have a building or a porta-john or somewhere where you have the permit off to the side. We don't want the inspectors to have to search to try to locate the permit. So if you just had a little note on there, permit is inside storage shed, or permit is on side of barn or in mailbox at a certain specific location, that would help out tremendously. I think that's it on that one.
So vacation homes and short-term rentals. People might remember first rules started with the Estes Valley and what we called vacation homes. Just basically if you rent your home out on a nightly basis or for a couple nights, you're using it as like a VRBO or Airbnb. And then we adopted short-term rental rules county-wide. They were a little bit different. This year, we just sort of put them all together because all the vacation homes that were originally in the Estes Valley that were non-conforming have now been brought in as short-term rentals. So there's one set of code rules. And then we've changed the rules a little bit. People might know you need a building permit to convert your home to a short-term rental. And then you go through a life safety inspection because we're not requiring sprinklers for most short-term rentals. We do make sure that there are critical safety features like bedroom egress windows, stairs, guardrails, carbon monoxide detectors. So we tweaked them a little bit. When you build a new short-term rental, a new home that's going to be a short-term rental, or you build it, or if you build a new home, then you later convert it to a short-term rental, or build it to start as a short-term rental, starting under the 2021 code, you will need to put a fire sprinkler in there, no matter how big it is. Not for existing ones that are already in existence, but for new ones. You will have to have dark sky exterior lighting, which basically means shielding your light fixtures so the light points downward, doesn't escape the property. We tweaked the fire extinguisher rules a little bit in consultation with the fire department to get a slightly higher grade of fire extinguisher. And we clarified, the rules already said you can't have an exterior solid fuel burning fire pit in the wildfire hazard area. That's because we're all well aware of the extreme wildfire danger, but renters may not be. But we clarified it to make it clear that we meant not just fire pits, but any exterior solid fuel burning appliance, whether that's a fireplace, fire pit, temporary fireplace, not allowed in the wildfire hazard area. And we also tried to bring bed and breakfast and resort lodge cottages into alignment. We had an amendment in our code for a number of years that said if you have a resort lodge and you have a small cottage, cabin, it didn't have to be sprinklered, but that didn't have any size limit on it. So right now with short-term rentals, you can have up to 10 people and you're under the residential code, 11 or more is in the commercial code. So now we say that if you have a resort lodge cottage, the same way, 10 occupants or less is the residential code, 11 or more is the commercial code. And the same thing with an owner-occupied lodging house, AKA a bed and breakfast. If you have no more than 5 guest rooms, which is roughly 10 people, you can stay under the residential code. Larger than that, you go into the building code. And even the ones in the residential code are going to have to meet some of the life safety requirements that we have for short-term rentals. Not all of them, because there should be an owner present to make the hazard less. But some of the more critical ones, will have to meet if you convert it into one of these type of occupancies.
And speaking of wildfire hazard areas, the code has increased the requirements and we have amended with some alternatives. As you can see from the graph on the left, wildfires have gotten more frequent and larger. Due to hotter, drier, and more destructive fires, a lot more underbrush, not as much snow, not as much rain. So as you can see, that we had this latest fire, the largest one in Larimer County history. So we've amended to require the 4 foot in the wildfire hazard area of the building to be non-combustible, or 5 feet from the structure to be a defensible space. This also now includes additions onto buildings. The rest of the structure still has to meet the R331.5 non-combustible or flame spread class C, which is the 76 to 200 smoke, and 0 to max of 450 or better. Also including class A roof coverings, which is a change from class B. And then fire suppression is now required in 2-family dwellings, townhomes, and short-term rentals, as well as in the IBC. This exempts single-family dwellings, except in fire districts such as Lyons, that have an adopted fire code requiring such sprinklers and approved by the County Board of County Commissioners.
And again, that's for new short-term rentals built after March 1st, 2021, not for any that are in existence right now. Any homes that convert to that.
And then smoke CO detectors, we've also been requiring this for a period of time, but now it's in the code. It used to say in close proximity to sleeping areas. Now it specifically states carbon monoxide detectors on all floors within 15 feet of bedroom/sleeping areas. And it's not a new requirement now in the code that you have smoke in all bedrooms and 1 on every floor. Minor work such as a furnace or water heater replacement, you can put in a CO smoke detector that's battery operated. But when you're doing major work where you're opening ceilings, walls, floors, the alarms are required to be interconnected. As an option, instead of having to fish wire to certain locations and the cost of that, we have allowed that you can purchase Wi-Fi interconnected smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, but those would have to be replaced throughout the home. So they all talk to each other.
So electric vehicle readiness. Basically, we had a lot of discussion among the public and the Board of Commissioners, and what we're requiring going forward is that any new dwelling unit, whether it's built under the residential or the commercial building code, that has an attached garage or carport has to be electric vehicle ready. We're not saying you actually put an electric vehicle charger, but you do have to install a 50 amp, a 208, 240 volt dedicated branch circuit for the electric vehicle supply equipment. And we want it to run to a place in the garage or carport where you're most likely to plug your car in. We're not saying exactly where it is, but obviously on the side of where your car might be, maybe at the back, towards the back. Obviously you have to get in towards the front, somewhere where it would be convenient to then put in a vehicle charger if you actually have an electric vehicle. But the idea here was that it's better to do this in the beginning. It's much harder to do it later. It would be a convenience to people. And the state has a goal of having almost 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. The only way that's going to happen is with electric vehicle charging stations in people's homes and in apartment buildings and commercial occupancies. So that is new for the code, and builders have to be aware that they have to. That's for a new house. That's not for an alteration or an addition or something like that. Similarly, we want new dwelling units to be ready for solar, photovoltaic, or wind energy. It's a very similar language. New dwelling unit shall be provided with the same 50 amp, 240 volt circuit, run from the attic space beneath the roof surface, most likely to support rooftop PV or wind energy. So if you have a south-facing roof, that's probably where it's going to go. It'll have to be outlined on the plans, and we'll check that. If maybe your south-facing roof is all broken up and you have a west-facing roof, that's, you could propose that if that's what you're going to do. And again, The reason for that is it's much easier to do it when you build the house than to go back later and put in the PV system.
Okay, moving on to passive radon mitigation. They are required for all newly constructed dwellings and additions exceeding 1,000 square feet. Those systems have to have the levels tested prior to final. If they exceed 4.0 picocuries per liter, that system has to be made into an active system. So as you know, with a passive radon system, you have to have an outlet readily located near the radon that a fan could be plugged into. We do require that those fans be external to the habitable space. We don't want them in crawl spaces or on first floors and closets, either exterior to the building or in attics.
And this is another one that we put into the code that's been kind of the practice for a number of years. People are probably aware that when subdivisions or other planning development approvals are given, we've typically required radon mitigation systems for decades. And it just made more sense to put it into the building code itself and then refer you to Appendix F, which is where you have the technical standards for the radon system. Where you can do this. So engineered foundations, again, a lot of these we're just trying to make things more transparent. By policy, we've required most foundations to be engineered with certain exceptions. And that really hasn't changed. So because on the Front Range, we have expansive and collapsible soils. We've got some really bad soils here. In the mountains, you've got more rocky soils, but you typically have steep slopes, high winds, heavy snows, which might drive you into needing an engineered structural design. So now it says all foundations shall be designed by an engineer, and it lists what we're looking for: soil bearing, subsurface and surface water, drainage, ventilation, etc. The exceptions being if there's an existing subdivision where the conditions of approval specifically say you don't need engineered footings and foundations because the soils test at that time showed it was not expansive or collapsible soils, or if you're outside of a subdivision, unless you need engineered design, and those sections refer to steep slopes or expansive soils, or certain kinds of buildings, basically the pole barns and loafing sheds that we have prescriptive handouts for. If you follow those handouts, you don't have to have an engineered foundation, but if you go outside the bounds of those handouts, the prescriptive design standard, then you would need an engineered foundation.
So new roof covering requirements, as you know, we have regular and costly hail damage in our areas on a frequent basis. We're replacing thousands of roofs. So in line with Fort Collins requirements, we now require that all roof coverings be Class 4 high impact. As you'll note from the inset, that's a steel ball diameter of 2-inch drop from 20 feet that it can withstand that impact. It's going to create a lot less roofs having to be replaced during regular hailstorms. Class A as well, as we talked about before. The thing here is that with this requirement, we really need to make sure that roofing contractors are leaving a package, either the wrapper itself in a readily locatable space, or a bundle on the outside of the building so the inspectors can identify that it is indeed a Class 4.
And one advantage of this is we've discovered over the years that insurance companies, in case of loss, will pay for whatever the building code minimum requirement is. So if we don't require Class 4 impact resistant shingles, they won't pay for it. You'll have to pay for it yourself. So we're hoping this will actually save homeowners money because now the insurance companies will pick up on it. Fort Collins has had this requirement for a while, and we've just kind of been a little late to the party.
Yeah, it was the same when we implemented the ice and water shield, that a lot of insurance companies did not want to pay for that on the older buildings. Since it was in the code, it kind of forced their hand, and homeowners didn't have to come up with the extra money for that.
Okay, so the next section, we're going to talk about some of the energy code changes. We can't go into all of them. That could be a whole webinar or multiple ones, and we'll give you a reference later for where you can find more information. But what we see as the most important issues are the change in the prescriptive insulation and window values. We're keeping an easier option for detached utility buildings. Res check reports, which is a slightly different compliance path. That's a total UA alternative. Building air leakage, enclosed mechanical rooms, duct testing requirement, a couple of requirements around lighting, a new requirement for homes to follow one of the additional energy efficiency packages, and a slight change to our building commissioning rules.
So speaking of energy code, this is going to be one of the largest changes in construction for our contractors and engineers to come up with these methods. As you can see, walls now require an R30 cavity insulation. The only way to achieve that is with spray foam, 4.5 inches of R7. We have amended the code so that we allow for the R23 plus 3. Basically, that's your net and blow system with your insulated OSB panel, sort of like a zip system or similar. That's going to maintain your ability to use those as shear panels, as well as meeting the continuous insulation requirement. Also, your attics have gone to R60 now from R49. It is allowed to use R49, but that depth has to be maintained to the exterior sheathing of the building. So your heel heights are going to have to be taller. Again, that's going to require more sheathing, siding, stuff like that. So it is your prerogative to go with the R49, or if you have the lower heels, to use the R60. Also, on the walls, as you can see, they do allow an R15 continuous. What we found in our research is that most cladding manufacturers, your Hardy, James Hardy, and stuff like that, they will not warranty a product over that depth of insulation. I believe their maximum is 1 inch. So that kind of forces your hand and also changes your practices and how the exterior sheathing's installed. Basement crawl now is R19 cavity or R15 blanket. As you can see on the slide on the right, that's your typical wall blanket. Not much change there, but just the fact that's going from an R10 to an R15. One of the issues we have had a lot with that is that the insulators stop that at the top of the foundation, where it's actually supposed to roll over the top so that it meets the insulation that's in your rim joist. Also, a rim joist not being sealed correctly, that requires a 360-degree air sealing prior to the insulation. So that's going to be the biggest thing that we're going to really be looking for, is that correct air sealing technique, and not leaving. If we reach up, a lot of the houses lately, you can reach up and feel the top of the foundation wall, then that's not actually a correct installation. Also, no exposed foam or paper. So if you are using foam in a crawl space, we run into this regularly. That has to be covered. There's multiple ways to cover it, with a cementitious board, 1/2-inch drywall, but that's something to think about, where you may prefer to use the blanket, which is rated for that smoke and flame spread requirement.
So windows, the code has gone down to 0.32 for windows, but if you read the fine print in the table under the prescriptive values, at our elevation, since everything in Larimer County is over 4,000 feet elevation, you can still use a 0.32 window. So we just put that in the table to make it simple. Maximum U value for windows 0.32. Any good double pane window will meet that. They're getting well beyond that. And of course, U values are a maximum. They're the opposite of R values, which are a minimum. And for the first time in our climate zone 5, the table for prescriptive values does include a maximum solar heat gain coefficient of 0.40, because more and more people are using air conditioning as our temperatures get hotter. Any good windows already meeting your 4.0. So this really shouldn't be much of a problem for anybody. Now, by popular demand, we actually did a survey and asked people what they thought, and they really wanted to keep an insulation option for detached utility and agricultural buildings, not having to meet the entire energy code requirement. So first of all, if you're not heating or cooling the building, there are no requirements whatsoever, but these are for heated detached buildings. Now, this does not apply, as I kind of alluded to, under when you don't need a permit for sheds, to habitable space. If you have a detached building you're using as an office, a studio, yoga studio, something, that's habitable space. That has to meet the energy code requirements. But if it's, an agricultural building or a shop, garage, a shed, something like that, you don't have to meet the full energy code requirements. You have options, 3 options basically. You can put a 2-hour limit switch on the heating system so that it shuts off after 2 hours, then there's no requirements. You probably want to insulate it anyway so you're not freezing in the winter and boiling in the summer. If you have a limit on your temperature so it can't go above 50 degrees, basically to keep it from freezing, make it somewhat tolerable, then there's no energy code requirements. If you're not doing one of those 2, then there are lesser requirements, and they're listed here. You can't design it to be as warm in the winter and as cool in the summer as you'd like. You do have to put at least R15 wall insulation, R30 in the roof ceiling, doors at least R3, but there's no slab perimeter insulation requirements as there normally would be. Windows can be 0.40 instead of 0.32. And if you're doing that, you want to make sure if there's any plumbing in there, if you've got a bathroom in your shop, then obviously you're protected from freezing.
So new res check requirements, instead of being able to go back 3 code cycles, now it has to be 2018 or 2021. You would use this in alternative to the prescriptive insulation requirements. Res check compliance certification, verifying the home meets or exceeds the IECC requirements shall be deemed to satisfy the requirements of the code. Those will be required to be turned in at plan review. So your plans examiners can make sure they meet all of the requirements before it goes to the field.
And keep in mind that all these prescriptive rules, that's one of the energy code paths. There's a prescriptive path. This is a slight variation on that. There's also the HERS, the energy rating, or what we usually look at in Colorado as a HERS rating. You can go that way. You can do total building performance, which is the energy cost index. Those give you more trade-offs. But if you're going prescriptive path, that's like your cookbook. Your wall insulation shall be this, roof insulation shall be this, windows shall be this. Building air leakage testing. We've been trying for a couple cycles now to get people to pay attention to air sealing and air leakage, and we keep moving things in that direction. We have required now for a couple cycles that at final, you have to do a blower door test, and you can have no more than 3 air changes per hour from an approved air leakage tester, of which, someone who's trained and qualified, we're pretty liberal on who we accept as air leakage testers. The problem is, if you haven't been paying attention to air sealing until the final, we do have people who they come to final and they realize they have to do an air leakage test. At that point, it's kind of late to do a good job of sealing up all the penetrations and all the joints in your air barrier. And it's pretty much too late to really make it work. So what we're requiring now, and this is the same amendment Fort Collins has, is that you have to involve your air leakage tester early in the construction process. Actually, you want to bring them in at the end. Whoever you'd hire at the end to do the test, hire them at the beginning. They can consult with you. They can look at your plans. They can make recommendations. Might cost a little bit more up front, but it's going to save you money on energy every year after that, and in comfort and proper ventilation. So they have to provide a report to the building inspector. They have to do an inspection at the framing stage, before you cover things up, when all the holes are made, through the assembly, and then provide a report to us on any deficiencies they found and what corrections they made. That way, you'll have already taken care of that before you put any of the drywall on. That's the time when you can make it work, so you're going to pass the air changes per hour at the end. And then at the end, we will still need an air leakage test report from them showing that it had no more than 3 air changes per hour.
Okay, this is a new change on open combustion appliances. For the most part, most furnaces going in are 96% or greater direct vent. But there still is a lot of water heaters that used a draft hood B vent style system. So if it's open combustion fuel burning appliance, it has to be installed in a mechanical room that's thermally isolated from the rest of the building, from the habitable space. So that involves building a room, self-closing door, insulating that room, and also ducting your combustion air to that room. The alternative, by putting in a boiler, high efficiency water heater, gets you away from all those requirements and also from the TJI protection of I-joists and the drywall or a mechanical room requirement. We have an 80 square foot allowable space. So the cost of going to a boiler or high efficiency is now probably equal or less than all those requirements that you're going to have to meet by putting an appliance that requires a boiler, water heater that requires combustion air.
If you do go with all high efficiency appliances, you can still put your appliances in a mechanical room if you want. They just don't have to meet the thermal isolation criteria. You can build whatever mechanical room you want at that point.
Correct. Another item that came up is HVAC duct testing. So in previous code years, it was only outside the thermal envelope that ducts had to be tested. Now it's all ducts. The entire system has to be pressure tested according to IRC section 1103, 3.5, and 3.6. That's 8 CFM per 100 square feet of floor area. And then that documentation has to be also submitted by final. So here's another system that has to be tested that will involve somebody. It could be your mechanical contractor, or it could be the person that you're involving in your blower door and your air barrier testing. So that's something to think of. And the next slide also includes.
So mechanical ventilation testing, you have to have whole house mechanical ventilation. We're making the houses tighter. There's a number of strategies you can use. You don't have to go to a heat recovery ventilator or energy recovery ventilator. You know, the code is pushing in that direction. Those are getting cheaper. A lot of times people will use a high efficiency bath fan or set of bath fans in line or something that are running all the time. And this is the same table that's been in the code. It tells you how much air movement you need based on the size of the house and the number of bedrooms. The change is that mechanical ventilation systems, any part of your exhaust fan or any part of your exhaust system that's part of the whole house mechanical ventilation system has to be tested and verified to make sure we're getting the minimum flow rates. If you're not getting those flow rates, the system's not working as designed. And it tells you can do the testing according to the vent equipment manufacturer's instructions or by using a flow hood or box or other airflow measuring device. So now you're looking at testing the whole house mechanical ventilation system, the air leakage, the ducts. You might want to just hire an energy rater entirely and go the HERS rate. You know, it might save you money that way. And we do offer a slight discount on permits. If you're using a HERS rater, we take $100 off the permit fee to encourage that.
And then, you know, in the past, your mechanical contractors, they just look at this chart and you look at the 1,501 to 3,000 square foot, 4 to 5 bedroom, requires 75 CFM. So they've been putting in an 80 CFM fan. That's no longer going to work because they're going to have to calculate for either horizontal distance or vertical distance. Most of the fans we were seeing on the smaller ones, contractor putting in a 50 CFM, the old square style bath fan, those are only rated for a horizontal exit. Well, most contractors put those up out of the roof, reduces their efficiency to about 20%. So when you look at this chart and it says 75 CFM for that 4 to 5 bedroom, you're probably looking at approximately 120 CFM fan to actually achieve that flow at the exit due to bends and turns and distance and length of the duct, size of the duct. Also remember, those are supposed to be smooth wall. We don't allow for corrugated except in the tight bends where you can't get a hard pipe through. No foil pipe is allowed whatsoever. And since that is a constantly running system, it is required to be insulated from the fan to the roof deck.
Lighting. So there's a couple changes on lighting. In the last few code cycles, we've consciously dialed back the energy code requirements a little bit. So I think up until this code cycle, it said that all permanently installed lighting fixtures, except for your kitchen appliance lighting, has to have only high efficacy lighting sources. It used to say 90%, we dialed it back to 75%. Now the code says all 100%, and we're going with that 100%. It shouldn't be a problem anymore because now you've got the LED bulbs that provide a very good light quality. They cost more, but they last so much longer and they're reliable that you can only use high efficacy lighting sources now. That can be LED, it can be compact fluorescent lights, but why would you go with a CFL when you can use the LEDs that are just much better? And high efficiency lighting includes lamps and fixtures that have earned the Energy Star label. I don't think they have to have the Energy Star label. That's one very good way of telling, but as long as they're high efficacy, then you're fine. And that's for your permanently installed lighting fixtures. You can still plug in lamps and things like that where they don't have to be high efficacy, although I would recommend you do. This is probably the bigger change for lighting. This is the first time these occupant controls have been in the residential code. They've been in the commercial building code for a long time. But this is so that you don't waste energy by having the light on and walking away and forgetting about it. It's going to save you money as well. Operating costs anyway, although it will cost more up front. So all permanently installed light fixtures shall be controlled with a dimmer, an occupant sensor control, or some other built-in or installed control. And then as typical for the building code, it starts off with an absolute statement, all, and they put exceptions in, that's bathrooms, hallways, exterior light fixtures, safety or security lights. However, if you have an exterior light system that's more than 30 watts, it also needs automatic daylight shutoff, so it's not going to be left on all the time. And then this is also new to the residential code. It's been in the commercial building code, along with meeting the prescriptive requirements or one of the other performance paths. Every residential building has to pick one of the following to install, and you get to choose whichever makes the most sense for you. You can do a better building envelope than is required by the prescriptive code. You can put in more efficient HVAC equipment. Code does not require you to use the high efficiency equipment, although it makes things work much better. But if you choose to go with the high efficiency HVAC equipment, that can be your additional energy efficiency package. You can put a more efficient water heater system in. You can put a more efficient duct system in that has fewer bends and doesn't travel as far. And gets the air there where you need it, more efficiently. Or you can do better air sealing with a heat recovery ventilator or an energy recovery ventilator. So you pick which one you want to use, and on the plans you'll have to tell us, first of all, which path you're using and which additional energy efficiency package you're using. And then commercial commissioning, this is a little complicated. I'll try not to make it too complicated. The building code says for commercial buildings, unless they're below a certain amount of heat, space heating and water heating, have to do building commissioning. That basically means testing all the mechanical and lighting systems to make sure that they're functioning the way they were designed. And then all the, not just the air balance testing, but all the systems, and then the manufacturer's installation instructions given to the building owner so they see how it works. But that applied to a lot of commercial buildings and additions, and we thought it didn't make sense except for the larger ones. So in the last code cycle, we added a local amendment, which is in the bottom there in yellow, number 3, we added that. But in the last code cycle, it says you didn't have to do that if the building did not exceed 15,000 square feet. Well, then, upon further review and looking at how code worked last time and in coordination with 4 columns, we've lowered that. So we're still adding the exception, but the exception now is only for commercial buildings under 10,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet or less. If they don't exceed one of the other things, then they don't have to do commercial conditioning. And we also have an exception we kept that if you're doing an alteration to an existing building, you don't need to do commissioning because it's pretty hard to do with an existing building. So that's a lot of the most important changes in the energy code, but there are others. So rather than create a whole webinar, the Colorado Energy Office has a great resource, and I encourage you to go there on the 2021 energy codes. And that kind of shows you the link up there, Energy Code Adoption Toolkit. They've got a lot of resources, including recorded webinars on building vehicles and electrification. There's a push towards all electric houses. We're not requiring that, but things are moving in that direction. Residential ventilation, testing, lighting, etc. So I encourage you to go to the Colorado Energy Office and look at some of those seminars. And if it's useful, there's also training through that and through Excel, but we might be able to put on a webinar down the road too in terms of energy codes if people want us to do that.
Going back to some of your ventilation requirements, prior to this code, it never said that you had to have a return air system from a habitable room with a supplier, but it did say that the system had to be balanced. Well, they realized this wasn't really happening. So now return airs are required in all habitable spaces. Now there's a number of options. You can use transfer grills. That's done in basements a lot. Jumper ducts, or your typical ducting like in new construction that would go directly to your return air. You cannot use stud cavities, joist cavities with a pan like in the old days. We haven't allowed that for a while, so that's just a note to remember. But if you do have a house where the house has been, prior it was panned that way as return air, and you have a basement, we're not going to require that basement to be ducted. We will allow the panning. So basically on an addition or a basement, follow what the previous contractor installed, but all new construction, you must pipe that. And then appliance venting, another thing that we had not had in our code, and we're kind of going along with the city of Fort Collins, 22 inches from grade minimum for your exhausts, and 12 inches above the anticipated snow level. Now, there's no guide that says what that snow level is, so that's going to be up to the contractor based on whether he's building in Red Feather or Estes Park or if it's down here. What this will limit is the use of concentric vents through rim joists because you won't generally be able to achieve that 22 inches. So that's something to remind the HVAC contractors about when they're bidding and installing the systems.
So it already said in the code you had to be at least 12 inches above anticipated snow level. We just hadn't defined what that was.
Right.
So we're saying 10 inches is the minimum anticipated snow level, but it depends on your elevation. And as you're venting out the north side of your house, and is it exposed or is that where the wind's coming from? You want to keep it above the snow because if the snow blocks the intake, it'll shut your furnace off. And then you want to heat and you might freeze your pipes in the winter. So it's not a good thing. So we just defined what the minimum anticipated snow level was. So we're not going to go into these in great depth. There were just a few more things I thought were worth mentioning under the fuel gas chapter 24. But we're still amending out any ability to have unvented appliances because we think that's a safety issue, except there's something new on the commercial side in the mechanical code, unvented alcohol fuel burning decorative appliances. It's basically an enclosed fireplace that burns alcohol. Well, the alcohol burns very completely, doesn't produce any noxious products of combustion. So you install it per the manufacturer's installation instructions, and you can use that as a decorative appliance. That's pretty much the only exception for unvented appliances. Gas pipes still has to be 18 inches below grade. That's not what the code says, but that's how we've defined it for years. Unless it's at least 6 feet deep, 6 inches deep and under a 4-inch slab. We clarified the testing for natural gas piping and for propane piping and put that in the code again, just kind of our operative procedure. For external piping, 10 psi, liquid propane gas at 30 psi. So that's just clarifying what we really meant anyway. Shutoff valves. Sometimes you'll see a fireplace with a shutoff valve in the firebox, which to me makes no sense. If there's a fire, you don't want to reach into the fire to shut it off. So you can have that, but you have to have a secondary shutoff outside the firebox. Regulator vents. Have to terminate at least 3 feet minimum from building openings like any environmental exhaust has to. That's not clear in the code. The last one is the new one that I need to pass on. This comes from the Colorado Plumbing Board. When they adopt the state plumbing code, that becomes the minimum legal requirement for plumbing codes in the state. And we are a subdivision of the state, so we have to follow what they require. And this is a new requirement that when you have a high efficiency water heater fitted in plastic pipe, it's required to be tested to, it says it's tested to a maximum of 5 psi prior to being connected to the appliance. And we're not going to require the test at inspection because that would be a whole new inspection to inspect the test and then come back after you hooked it up. But you need to test it to make sure it doesn't leak. So it's not a possible carbon monoxide program. It doesn't require that for furnaces because they're not under the jurisdiction of the plumbing board, but they do require it for high efficiency water heaters.
Another note on the pressure test for liquid propane, the 30 psi is only for the exterior until you hit the building regulator. And then it also is at 10 psi, just like natural gas inside the building. Your valves and equipment inside the building will not withstand a 30 psi test. You can damage those, and it says in the code you cannot use those under the test, that they cannot be part of that test. So 10 psi indoors, 30 psi for propane outdoors, 10 psi for natural gas outdoors.
Thanks. Unless it's, one piece copper tubing or polyethylene, and there's nothing to test. So we don't require a test on that. Just a few things on plumbing. Not a lot has changed, but all private on-site wastewater treatment systems, gray water, non-potable water reuse, rainwater systems must comply with Larimer County Health Department regulations. The advantage, well, and it's a little bit strict on what's allowed for gray water and these other systems under state and county rules. The advantage of referring this to county health department regulations is if those regulations change, you don't have to go back and change the code. So we're basically deferring to them on what's allowed for these type of systems. There is something new in the code that also came from the Colorado Plumbing Board that it's kind of common sense, but now it's in code. You have to locate the shower walls either on the side wall of the shower compartment or arrange it so it's not discharging directly at the entrance so that you're not spraying water on the floor in the bathroom. And so the bather can adjust the valve prior to stepping into the shower spray. And the last one is not a code change, but it's a convenient time to make any kind of operational changes when the code does change. So water lines are supposed to be on a pressure test for both underground and rough plumbing inspections. We haven't been necessarily enforcing that. We've been enforcing the drain, waste, and vent system, but your inspector will be looking for the pressure test on the water line as well as on the drain, waste, and vent system. So make sure you have it on the air test for the inspector. Manufactured homes, again, something that we've been doing as kind of a policy, but now put in the code. We're not talking about modular homes. This gets confusing. A modular home is prefabricated or manufactured off-site, but it's built to the same residential code standards as a stick-built home. And whatever site you're putting it to, it has to meet the criteria for that site for the wind and the snow. But manufactured homes are under the federal HUD standard, which preempts local building department standards with two exceptions. It says that local building departments can require mitigation measures for snow and wind mitigation because the manufactured homes are not designed to be installed in some of the extreme weather conditions we have in Larimer County. They won't handle a really heavy roof load and they won't handle a high wind. So if you're going to put a manufactured home, either as a new home or relocating the home above 6,000 foot elevation or in a high wind area, that's anything with 140 miles per hour ultimate wind speed. It's kind of the western edge of Fort Collins and Loveland and beyond in the foothills. That's the high wind area. You can only do that if you have mitigation measures pre-approved by the county building division. And that can include a freestanding roof structure over the manufactured home, which will take the roof load. It could be an engineered wind fence. It could potentially be an approved snow removal plan. It's not very practical because if you've got, let's say, an older couple living in a HUD home and there's a high snow on the roof, they're not going to get up on the roof. We don't want them getting up on the roof to shovel the snow, but that's a possibility. Or another engineered system where they can look at the specific conditions of the site, the exposure, the prevailing winds, the topography, and come up with something we think is going to work. So again, that's just for HUD homes placed above 6,000 feet or in the high wind area. This is on the commercial side. One of the few commercial slides we have in here because most people are building residential. But accessibility for new construction. So in the 2018 International Building Code, they specifically chose not to reference the new ICC standard for accessibility. The way this works is people get confused a lot. We don't enforce the ADA. We have rules that are similar to the Americans with Disabilities Act. We enforce Chapter 11 of the Building Code, which says when and where things have to be accessible. And then it in turn cites an ICC standard, which has all the technical requirements for accessibility. How clear floor space and reach ranges and knee and toe clearances and all that good stuff. The old standard we've been using is the 2009 ICC standard. And in 2018, when the IBC was updated, they specifically chose not to go to the newer 2017 ICC standard because they felt people weren't ready yet. But now that is the reference standard in the 2018 IBC. So you have to design any new buildings to the 2017 standard. The big change is they've done a lot more research in the 30 years since the accessibility standards first took place. And people are using bigger wheelchairs, are using motorized wheelchairs. More people are taking advantage of accessibility to get out into the world, which is a great thing. But those motorized wheelchairs are bigger and they need more space. If you have your old 60-inch turning space in a toilet stall, you can't get in there with your motorized wheelchair and close the door possibly. So imagine how you'd feel if you couldn't close the door. So the circular turning space radius has increased, diameter has increased to 67 inches. And if you have a T-shaped turning space or passing spaces, turns, all those things, it requires more space for the wheelchairs. So architects and designers need to look into this. And EV charging stations, at least 5% of them at commercial buildings, must be accessible as well. If it's an existing building that has to provide an accessible feature because they did an addition or a change of occupancy or an alteration or something, you can still use the 2009 ICC standard, because it's very hard to go back and make that bathroom big enough with a 67-inch diameter. So it's almost like the short-term rentals, the new ones, new commercial buildings will have to meet the 2017 standard, and the old ones can still use the old standard.
We've come to the end of our slideshow. So at the top, you'll see that there's a link to the building codes. This slideshow will be available online for anybody to access. You can go on there and see all of our codes and our amendments, as well as our handouts. Also, we have the building staff on call line that's available at any time. You can call that number, leave a message, and somebody will return your call. This is our contact information for Eric and myself, as well as lead plans examiner Juan Mancha. We've given you our emails. That's also a link that you can just click to send us an email, and our phone numbers. We'll take questions at this time.
Hey guys, can you do me a favor really quick first before we jump into questions, is put that link that's in your slideshow in the chat box and send it out to everyone. That way they can access it. And also, if you can copy and paste your contact information and put that in the chat box as well, that way folks can just copy and paste it out of the chat box. Just might make it a little bit easier for everybody.
Okay, I can do that. I can go into the chat and paste that in there.
Yep, awesome. Thank you so much. We do have a few questions, not a ton, but we definitely have some. So I'm gonna jump into that, but first I want to remind folks that have called in, so you are on your phone, you called in with a phone number, that if you have a question, you can raise your hand by hitting *9, or folks that are using Zoom either on your computer or on a phone app, you can raise your hand, or we have questions in the Q&A we're going to get to right now. I'm going to attempt to go from easiest to hardest, knowing full well that I am a layperson that literally knows nothing about this. So I hope you enjoy me attempting to decipher questions. So first question is from Eric. When does this go in effect again?
March 1st, 2022. So that's for any
2 weeks.
Any permit applied for on or after March 1st. If you've already applied for your permit and it's somewhere in the queue, you still stand at the 2018 code. So, but anything you apply for after March 1st. Now, I hate to say this, but if you've already been designing the plans, you've been working on it for a while, and you come in after March 1st, you can request a code modification from me for us to review it under the 2018 code. And we're pretty flexible about that for the first maybe 60 days. We'd rather you submit for the 2021, but we understand maybe you hired your architect last November or something. After about 60 days, you're going to have to give me a really good case why we should review it under the older code. And then after about 90 days, it's got to be 2021. But the short answer is anything you apply for on or after March 1st, which is 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next question. Then this is in regards to the class 4 impact resistant shingles. Would a photo of the materials work if we left it posted with the permit?
Well, it's kind of.
We'd really prefer to have an example on site, at least a shingle, something that we could actually look at and verify that it is a class 4. You will have a roof certification form. Well, you'll have to label that as well. So you're, submitting that is the intended product. We can tell on site by looking if we have either the shingle or the wrapper of whether that actually is a class 4.
Another thought is maybe you have the invoice from the roof supplier that you could leave a copy of with the permit. So just so we can verify that it was actually the proper shingle install.
Yeah, if it has the address and the, number of bundles and, all of that on there, and you leave a photo or a photocopy of that, I believe that would also work.
All right, thanks guys. Next question, and I'm generalizing this one a little bit, just to clarify, all of these new regulation code updates are impact the unincorporated areas of Larimer County, correct?
Excellent question. That is correct. Some people get confused. Within the incorporated boundaries of Fort Collins, Loveland, and the 6 incorporated towns, those cities and towns have their own building codes, and that's what you go by. Fort Collins is going to the 2021 code in early March as well. Loveland is coming along, so is Estes. This is only in the unincorporated Larimer County area.
One thing you want to remember is not so much in Fort Collins, but in Loveland and areas, there's little enclaves within the towns that are still Larimer County. So it would be a good idea. If you're unsure, you just call in, they'll be able to look it up and let you know if it is indeed Larimer County. Fort Collins, since they also follow the class 4, that's not going to be much of an issue, but Loveland is different.
Good explanation, and I have a slight follow-up. Just to be specific, so for siting requirements in Red Feather Lakes, this does apply, correct?
Yes, Red Feather Lakes is not incorporated, so it's under Larimer County rules.
All right, thank you. Next question, for 4-foot exterior or 5-foot ground cover, is it relevant on new build only? How about remodels or sheds and garages?
So that would be any new structure, and that's an either or, 4-foot non-combustible or 5-foot defensible space, or additions. So the additions listed of 1,000 square feet or greater. So a typical remodel or alteration under that.
Well, you're thinking 1,000 square feet's radon. So any new, she's asking about the wildfire hazard.
Oh, right.
So any new structure, but there is an exception we put in there for ag buildings like greenhouses and loafing sheds. Those are pretty small, and those don't need to meet the wildfire hazard construction requirements. But garages do. The theory being that garage is more hazardous, and some people like to spend a lot of time in their garage, maybe more than in their house. So if you do an addition onto a building, the addition has to meet those requirements, but the existing building does not have to. It gets a little tricky. Now, with defensible space, we had a problem before we realized the way we'd written the code, the addition, if it was under 50%, didn't have to meet defensible space requirements. So you could build an addition right up to the edge of the forest. And that was a safety hazard, didn't make sense. So any addition has to meet the defensible space requirements. And if the addition is 50% or more of the whole building, the existing building, then you have to go back and cut back the trees and provide defensible space around the entire structure. So I think I confused you more, Michelle, with that explanation.
And thanks for catching that.
That's okay. I'm already confused. So as long as the folks answering or asking the questions understand, they're who matter in this situation, because trust me, I'm not building anything. Okay, next question. The R60 installation required for ceilings, does that requirement apply to only new construction, or would we be required to bring an existing home up to code in that regard?
Just new construction. And we've actually amended our energy code to make that a little easier, because it's pretty hard to change an existing roof construction to accommodate R60. So what the energy code says before we amended it is, if you open up the roof cavity or the wall cavity and it's uninsulated, you have to bring it up to code. And we've said, well, that might require to reconstruct the wall or the roof or put exterior insulation on, which is the roof isn't designed for. So what our amendment says is for existing buildings where the cavity is not filled, you just fill it with insulation to the most practical extent possible. You don't require spray foam, but if your roof didn't have any insulation for some reason, you could do net and blow in the roof, wouldn't have to come up to R60.
All right, sounds good. Next question. Regarding mechanical ventilation and roofing systems, do we need to get that tested prior to a roof inspection, or does that get tested by an outside source?
Roofing systems. So the mechanical ventilation system needs to be tested as an independent, I'm not understanding quite the question. If they don't have a roof cap on and the roof hasn't been installed, that's when they would do their testing anyway before that cap was installed. And that's probably going to be your blower door tester. We'll do that near the end of the job. So I would assume the roof's going to be complete, and he'll be removing that roof cap to perform his test. Does that answer your question?
I don't know, but Jeff, who asked the question, if that doesn't answer your question, Jeff, just let us know. You can either raise your hand or maybe rephrase it in the Q&A, and we will try again. So next question, we're all good. Jeff got it, yay.
Okay.
Okay, so next question. Related to the electric vehicle charging requirements, is a separate circuit and outlet required for every parking spot? For example, an apartment with 200 parking spaces.
No, that's being handled under the land use code, because the land use code is looking at what percentage of the vehicle parking spaces in a apartment building are required to be. Well, you know, most apartment buildings are going to have some kind of parking garage or something, and not every space in a parking garage has to be electric vehicle ready. I believe the land use code changes have gone in place. I don't have that answer offhand. So this is more intended to be a dwelling unit. Now, it's true that if you had an apartment building and each apartment had its own little garage, then the dwelling unit is supposed to have an electric vehicle charging station in its garage. So I guess if you had a 200 apartment building with 200 separate garages, you'd have 200 electric vehicle charging stations. So it depends on how you lay out the apartment building or the hotel or something like that. And honestly, the last time Larimer County had an apartment building built was, I have no idea when that was, because we get very few built in the county. They're almost all built in one of the cities.
Right, in the unincorporated areas.
In the unincorporated area, right.
Yep, awesome. All right, this might be our last question, we'll see. Do you need to put 4-foot fireboard or stone on sheds?
In the wildfire area?
The intent was not for sheds. It was only for buildings that might have some, well, not even habitable, might have some real occupancy, like you know, a pole barn or a garage should. But a shed, I mean, it's kind of splitting hairs, but it's kind of hard to define exactly which buildings we're exempting. But I would not worry about it for a shed. I would worry about it for a larger building, any habitable building, garage, shop, pole barn.
Okay. Well, I don't have any other questions in the Q&A, and I don't see anyone with their hands raised. So now, while we let people kind of consider if they have anything else they want to ask, I was hoping I could just mention really quickly that we plan to have this up on Larimer County's YouTube channel. We typically need about 24 hours to get that done. It takes Zoom a bit to process, and then we kind of have to go through some steps on YouTube to get this updated. But we will have this on Larimer County's YouTube channel, hopefully by end of day tomorrow. And it's as simple as just going to YouTube and search for Larimer County Government. We will pop right on up. And it will be at the top since it'll be one of our newest videos that we have uploaded. Anything else, Eric and Mark, that you want to share that you haven't had time to share yet, or any reminders?
I would just remind people that you can always contact our building staff on call by email or by phone or at our front counter with any questions you have. That's what they're there for. They'll help you through. We'd much rather have you come in and ask questions before you submit the plans, certainly before you build the building. You can buy copies of the significant changes to the 2021 codes through International Code Council. There's a link to that from our building webpage. You can buy the building codes themselves if you want. You can also get a free online read-only version of the building codes and look at that through our building webpage or through ICC. So there's a lot of resources out there. You know, we're here to help you figure it out so that everyone can build to the 2021 codes and makes your life easier, makes our life easier. And again, thanks for being interested in the code changes and finding out what's coming down the road.
And don't forget that link will take you to our amendments and all of the codes. So anything you need to look up, and then if you have a question, feel free to reach out. That's what we're here for. It's better to find out ahead of time if you have a question than once you've already completed it. And then we come out and it's not meeting the code. So like I said, feel free to reach out at any time.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation and your expertise today. Thanks, everybody who joined us on a lovely Tuesday afternoon. I hope that it was informative. And as the guy said, if you have questions, feel free to just reach out to them. And I don't see anything else in the Q&A link. So I think we should probably say goodbye and go on our separate ways.
And thank you, Michelle, for hosting.
Yep, thank you. Have a good day.
All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.